Great. Okay. So, uh, yes, hello. My name is Asmita. I work at South Black Sisters, and today I'll be talking a little bit about what we do, what our campaigns are, some of the current issues, and some of our current priority areas. So yeah, I'll be going through who SPS is, what we do, some of the current issues facing us, and some of our current campaigns. Um, so for those who are not familiar, South All Black Sisters is a by and for organization. Now, by and for organization is an organization which is run, led, governed, and the services are delivered for Black, minoritized, and migrant women who are victim survivors of gender-based violence, domestic abuse, harmful practices, and the service is run by women from these communities as well. So very much grassroots focused. We were founded in 1979, um, and the idea was very much to have a community-based group which provided frontline support to women from Black, minoritized, migrant communities who were being subjected to various forms of violence against women and girls. And some of the frameworks that we operate within are, centering the prevalence of violence against women and girls, but also secular human rights and intersectional frameworks, particularly focused on the intersectionalities between race, gender, class, and migration status. The key thing to note is that over 60% of our service users are women with insecure immigration status, particularly with the no recourse to public funds condition attached to them. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And then there's also a large chunk of our service users, about 70%, whose cases involve honor-based abuse where multiple perpetrators are involved. So some of our current issues are heavily focused on um, the hostile environment for migrants in the UK. Now, what that means for those who are not familiar is that it's been decades of government policy that it should be made harder for migrants with insecure immigration status to, just exist in the UK, to disincentivize people from becoming migrants. And in 2012, Theresa May's government made it official government policy to introduce a hostile environment for migrants. What that meant was introducing things like checks to right to rent checks, increasing data sharing between statutory agencies and immigration enforcement, um, and just ramping up the role of immigration enforcement across different aspects of people's lives, be it, renting, be it accessing health services, be it accessing statutory support. Along with that, also making it much harder for people, uh, to have regular status by increasing visa costs, by putting harsher conditions on obtaining visas. Along with this, no recourse to public funds is a key issue. Now, what no recourse to public funds means is that if you're a migrant with insecure immigration status, it's likely that you have a condition which disallows you from accessing any kind of welfare support or benefits. It's really hard to know exactly how many people in the UK have NRPF, but estimates suggest that it's between 3 to 4 million, which is quite a large number. Now, what that means for us is that if you're a victim of violence against women and girls, so if you're being subjected to abuse, often if you have no recourse to public funds because you might be on a short-term visa, you might be undocumented, you might not be, you might not have settlement or citizenship, then even if you go to a domestic abuse refuge, you will be turned away likely because most bed spaces in refuges, their rent is tied to welfare, to housing benefits. So, for a lot of our service users who come to us, they've often been turned away from other violence against women and girls services, from refuges, because they have no recourse to public funds. So that's been a key issue for us. And over the last 30 years, we've been campaigning for greater support for women who have no recourse to public funds. Ideally, we want the NRPF condition to be scrapped because, if this is a welfare state, if this is a humane country, then people should be given state support if they need it. And your migration status shouldn't be the reason you're denied support. But specifically, we also want, at a minimum, uh, victims of abuse who are in abusive situations, we want there to be a safety net where they can access state support, at a minimum. And I'll talk more about what that means. So, um, as a result of our campaigning, the government introduced two things. One is the domestic violence indefinite leave to remain rule. Now, this will give victim survivors who are in abusive situations, but those who are on certain visa types, it will give them a pathway to applying for indefinite leave to remain. Along with this, there was the migrant victims of domestic abuse concession. This gives victim survivors access to 12 weeks, about 12 weeks of benefits, so universal credits. You can access some public funds while you apply for your DVILR and regularize your status. And why this is important is because it's been, we've noticed this for decades that perpetrators weaponize women's immigration status to keep them from leaving. And the surest way for women to get access to safety is to disentangle their immigration status from the perpetrator. So women need access to independent immigration status and also state support in order to be safe and leave abuse. And we've been campaigning for this. I think now it's close to 35 years. Um, and yeah, just in terms of no recourse to public funds, it makes women three times more likely to be subjected to violence. And also, it's important to note that the number of people who are subjected to NRPF is likely to rise because the government, with their own settlement proposals, which were introduced last year, they underwent consultation. They haven't been implemented yet. But one of the things in those proposals was that you should not get access to public funds until you get your citizenship. So far it's until you get your ILR. Once you get your ILR, you can start accessing public funds. But if those proposals um, come into play, then you can't get access to any kind of state support until you get citizenship, which makes it much harder for definitely our service users, but a lot of vulnerable people um, to get any kind of state support, and it makes them more vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, and just more precarity. So this number is likely to rise. So the MVDAC and the DVILR. So this is what we just touched upon what they do. But the important thing to note is that if you're um, on certain visa types, then you don't have access to this framework of support. So you know, ILR pathway for domestic abuse victims and the access to 3 months of benefits, that's only limited to some cohorts, including partners of those who are British citizens. Um, and it's extremely limiting because what that means is if you're, for example, on a student visa yourself, if you're on a work visa yourself, if you are undocumented. And a lot of the times, what also happens is that women are undocumented because the perpetrator will arrange their immigration affairs in a way to deny them support. So they don't even know what their status is because the immigration system is really complex and really expensive to navigate. So all of these cohorts are excluded from any kind of state support. Um, in As a result of our campaigns in 2024, the government at the time extended the MVDAC, so the access to benefits, to a few more cohorts. But I say extended with the caveat because what they did was they said, okay, a few more cohorts. So if you're a partner of somebody who's on a skilled worker visa or on a few other visa types, then you can get access to 3 months of state support. But at the end of the 3 months, you can't apply for the ILR via the domestic violence route. So what that does is that at the end of the 3 months, these women face a cliff edge because what do you do? So that we argued against it at the time as well, but that's also complicated this situation even further. Um, Whereas what we argue is that this framework should be extended to all victim survivors, regardless of immigration status. So what kind of visa you're on shouldn't matter. But if you have no recourse to public funds and you're going through an abusive situation, then you should just be given access to this pathway. So that's our one of our campaigns. Then I think the key thing to note is that these policies are pushing women into adverse outcomes because of the complexity, and a lot of our service users, they spend around 3 years, or some spend even longer with us because it's so difficult to navigate the immigration system. Some cases are so complex that it takes that much longer. If you're navigating the immigration system, if you're navigating social services, family courts, other statutory services, um, and then it's important to think about women who don't have access to specialist services, because specialist services like ours are also concentrated in larger cities or areas where there's more funding. So there are also a lot of women who are, for example, in rural areas or in areas where there is no community-based service. Then they're kind of left to navigate all of this on their own. And on top of that, there might also be language barriers. There might also be sustained pressure from the community or the perpetrator. So, what these policies are doing, it's, at times pushing women into adverse outcomes rather than making it easier for them to escape abuse. And what we see is that the response is very limited, whereas the need is much larger. Now, it's really hard to estimate again how many women are in need of state support, but the domestic abuse commissioner, she did some estimates. She commissioned some research which estimated that at least 32,000 women in the UK will need access to support, who have no recourse to public funds. Um, and I think about 8,000 will present to authorities and they'll need things like accommodation support. So that's also a conservative estimate. So it's likely much larger. Um, and the framework of protections is very small. The only other thing that exists is if um, um, you're a victim survivor of abuse with no recourse to public funds, there's this thing called a Support for Migrant Victims Fund, which again, as a result of our campaigning, as a result of campaigning by other organizations in the sector, the government introduced in 2021, which gives access to up to 500 women, uh, uh, to 500 women being able to access 3 months of support. And that, again, if you think about the need being in the tens of thousands at least, and it's only for 500 women, this fund, um, then it again raises the question of, is it enough? Which, of course, it's not. Um, so, yeah, I think another thing that we're contending with at the moment, which I'm sure has come up a lot over the course of this conference, is the rise of the far right, which is a challenge for us as well, because our work is at the intersection of violence against women and girls and the migration system. Um, and we have challenged the hostile environment for migrants for as long as we've existed. So the rise of the far right poses unique threats to us. And I think, especially in the aftermath of the riots in 2024, which, if I'm not wrong, at that moment was the first time of that kind of mobilization of the far right for a long time. Um, we led this campaign to it's got this text is very small, so you don't need to read it, but it's essentially we came up with 12 demands to tackle the rise of the far right, where we argued that the government really needs to tackle the root causes of the rise of the far right, which is things like you know, austerity and underinvestment in public services and this kind of normalization of racism in parliament and in media, and um, invest in communities rather than you know having more focus on criminalization and increasing surveillance, which actually harms the communities that we work with. And our CEO and CEOs from a few other organizations who work in this space and delivered this letter signed by over 60 charities who had supported these demands to Downing Street. And I think along with that, it is important to say that it's really not possible for us to ignore the political context, because not just do harsher immigration policies make migrant victim survivors of abuse more unsafe and exposed to more violence, but even more directly, it poses more threats to their physical safety, women who are in asylum accommodations or women who are in just going out and about, reporting, feeling more fear and more insecurity. Um, Especially if you think about the fact that in the past, when the far right has mobilized, for example, in 2024, there were lists of like immigration centers being targeted. Um, Thankfully, we were not on it, but as a public facing organization that speaks vocally on these issues, this creates this level of insecurity for our staff and our service users. So we're extremely concerned about um, the rise of the far right, both in its mobilization, but also in immigration policy of this government, sh- you know, shifting to the far right through the earned settlement proposals, which we're opposing and calling to be scrapped, and also for um, the changes to the refugee framework, which makes refugee status temporary, hugely concerning for anybody who's got any stake in tackling violence against women and girls. And then finally, I think just to touch on weaponization of work. So what we're also seeing is recently there's been this uptick in the trend to weaponize violence against women and girls. And there's been a lot of fake news which is targeting migrant men. For example, I think towards the end of last year, there was fake news that I think over 40% of sexual offenses are caused by migrant men, which is not true. But at the same time, this lie was repeated in Parliament. It was covered by the mainstream media, and we were hugely concerned by that. So, along with um, other organizations that we work with, we coordinated this statement, which essentially talked about how the weaponization of violence is really harmful, not just for the communities who are at the other end of the fake news, so for Black, minoritized, and migrant communities, but also for victim survivors of abuse, because it takes the attention away from the root causes of violence against women and girls. And it needs like this issue in society, it needs a system wide response. It needs focus on education and prevention, and also investment in services like ours, which provide frontline support, which often operate on shoestring budgets and are often at the risk of closure. We're chronically underfunded for the kind of work we do. So that is the kind of response we need, which, scapegoating certain communities, it's not just racist, but it also actively takes away from tackling the root causes of violence against women and girls. So we were really pleased that over 200 organizations signed our statement, which was covered in the media, which we felt was really important to, from our specialist perspective, put out that counter narrative. Um, And along with that, we then worked with um, six other organizations, some of them who are listed on on the slide, whose logos are listed, but also Latin American Women's Rights Service, IMCAN, with support from Asylum Matters. We produced this guide, which I think you can see the link on the screen. And the guide is aimed at, anybody who is concerned by this trend and who wants to have more productive conversations with people in their lives who are maybe vulnerable to the threat of, um, falling for this fake news, and talking to them about why weaponization of VOG is dangerous and what instead should the focus be. So this is a really practical guide. It's aimed at people who don't have expert knowledge of um, these issues. But if you're looking for a resource to help you talk to your friends or people in your lives about, this exact problem, then it's a really good resource. So yeah, that's another thing we worked on recently. But yeah, I'll just conclude by saying that the evidence shows, and also our experience of nearly 5 decades as an organization, that victim survivors of abuse, they need both the right to settlement and public funds in order to come forward and be safe. And it's not, you know, it the current climate is not making anybody safe. It's actually increasing the threat of violence and exploitation, which is ultimately harming some of the most vulnerable communities. So I will conclude here.